I think we're probably giving people enough time to log in. So once again, welcome everybody, and thanks for making the time to join us today for the second IAB GCC Digital Adspend Survey, which reflects the year 2021 for the MENA region. We're excited to bring this to you today, as I say, for the second time, because we feel that we've really made some significant improvements to the study year on year. So we're heading in the right direction, we believe, and we believe that there's some very interesting insights to be shared. I want to thank all the companies and individuals who were involved in pulling together the information, who provided either actuals, support, introductions to key people, or in fact did interviews to verify or in some cases question some of the data that's being shared today. So thanks very much to all those companies that have taken part. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. And I definitely implore many of those who didn't take part to engage in future studies such as this, because the more of the industry that takes part in it, the more accurate the information is, the more useful it is to everybody, and therefore, obviously, the more valuable it is to us as an industry. Daniel, if you could just switch to the next chart, please. Thanks. Just a couple of things. If you don't mind keeping your microphones on mute, it obviously makes it a lot easier for people to hear the speaker. And we will definitely be taking questions. I think that's one of the important parts of these kind of webinars. But if you don't mind, if we can leave them towards the end, or by all means, put them into the chat box, and we can answer those later on during the session as well. Unless obviously they're fundamental to your understanding, we'll try and answer them during the session where that's appropriate. So yeah, please go ahead and engage in the discussion. This is obviously not this is not an IAB study. This is a MENA study. This is about us as a market, and your input and your involvement is critical to its success. So please engage as you see fit. So obviously, for those who don't know me, I'm Ian. I'm the CEO of the IAB here at the GCC, which represents the digital advertising industry for this market. And I'm doing the introduction as you speak. So here we are. We will have Dr. Daniel Knapp, who will be leading the discussion around the results themselves. Daniel and Andrew, who many of you will have met either this year or last year, have led the research that we've been conducting, as they are well versed in these kinds of studies for many of the IAB markets around the world. So they come with a great deal of insight and knowledge around how these should be done, can be done, and indeed have been very helpful in making sure that we are world-class in the way that we are conducting this survey for our region here. They're fully aware of some of the challenges that we have in measuring digital advertising, and also some of the challenges that are unique to our region as well. So very, very keen for them to lead us through that discussion. So thank you very much, Daniel, and Andrew, I think, is on the call as well. I've asked Ryan Karaki and Michelle Malkoon, who are the chair and the vice chair of the IAB board. Most of you will know them. Ryan, obviously representing Google, and Michelle representing DMS or Schwery Group. And they'll do a little wrap up and lead some of the Q&A towards the end of the session as well. If there's time, which I believe there should be, we've also asked Daniel to share with us a view of the macroeconomic picture, as he's done for other IABs around Europe in particular. It'll be a very short top-line view of where we see the macroeconomic picture affecting digital advertising and advertising more generally in the coming years. It's a fool's errand to predict the future, as we all know, but we'll give you some pointers as to what are the considerations that are interesting and important as we consider that. So hopefully we'll have some time towards the end for that session. If we don't, maybe we'll be able to persuade Daniel to come back another time and we'll do something more in depth on that. So that's really it for the agenda today. So next chart, please, Daniel. For those who are not members of the IAB, again, I implore you to get involved and to join the IAB. We aim to be the catalyst for helping to grow the digital economy within this region. We do that by accelerating knowledge sharing, such as exercises like this. We also recently did a study around the programmatic industry, which some of you will be aware of. But also it's about establishing accountability for our region and making sure that we're playing on the world stage. So by providing robust and interesting insights into our region, it allows us to compare ourselves with other markets, and of course allows us to be compared in, for example, EMEA budget setting. It becomes a lot easier to create robust budget setting or investment plans when there's some consensed knowledge and information about the market. So if you're not a member of the IAB, please reach out and get involved. The more companies that are engaged, as I said earlier, the more accurate the information we can provide, and the more we can serve you as an industry and help grow the whole industry. So just a little bit about this study. We did this last year, for those of you who may or not may remember. It was the first year that we did it. We had lots of challenges in getting it live, but we did manage to work through those, thanks in great part to many of you that are on this call today. But this year, as I said, we've really spent a lot of time analyzing what we were able to produce last year, looking at ways of improving the in-depth basis of the information. So one of the key areas was increasing the inputs from companies, and we had an increase of about 30% in terms of the number of companies that engaged in the program in one shape or another. But importantly, also markets outside of, I don't even say UAE, I say outside of Dubai. Now, obviously, there's lots of headquartered agencies, for example, platforms based in Dubai, but we really wanted to make sure that we were getting a voice from other markets that are outside of Dubai, from people based in those markets and operating in those markets, whether that be Morocco or Egypt or KSA. So we have got we feel a much more local view on those markets, and we're able to share some of the knowledge that we've gained from that exercise. So you'll see a bit more granular data than we had last year. So we've really built on last year's efforts. So around geography, for example, the splits of investment by geography, splits by formats, for example, we've gone a little bit deeper than we were able to last year. And for the first time, being the second year, we were able to get robust trend data. So year-on-year information around a couple of the categories, and certainly on the top line, which I think you'll find very interesting going forward as well. Just a final point, we are providing this information free of charge to the whole industry. As I mentioned earlier, as a member body, we rely on members to pay subscriptions, which we then invest on their behalf in exercises like this. The more members we have on board, the more we can do these kind of exercises, the greater in-depth nature of the information we can get as well. So in this instance, it's a free of charge service to the whole industry, members and non-members, but obviously we would encourage you to engage as members going forward. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Daniel and his trusty sidekick, Andrew, who'll be taking us through the presentations themselves. As I say, thank you very much, Daniel. Over to you.
Thank you, Ian, and a very warm welcome from me as well. Thank you for joining, and I can only second Ian in my gratitude for your collaboration and expert input to make this study possible in the first place. My name is Daniel Knapp. I'm the Chief Economist at IAB Europe, and I've been conducting market sizing and trend analysis on digital advertising since 2008 for over 28 countries in Europe and other regions in the world. When we started collaborating around 2 years ago, it was very clear that the MENA region is a special region. Number one, it was in a sense an uncharted territory where we knew a lot of activity was going on, where we saw a lot of global firsts were happening, where we saw, for instance, a massive, faster adoption of video than in other markets, but the market wasn't measured. We also knew that local trading cultures and the way the market operates is distinct from other markets, and we needed to adjust our method to pay respect to that and to reflect the way the market operates. Now, as Ian said, we have refined our methodology since last year, and we are relying on interviews, market input, relying on economic modeling, we're relying on company filings, and also other inputs of working groups and cross-validation of numbers in order to come to a consensual picture. This is an approach which is, number one, unique to the MENA region, but a lot of elements of this approach can be found in other regions, in the US, in the UK, in Germany, or some of the leading digital ad markets in the world, as they're increasingly pivoting their own market sizing approaches to approaches which we are already from the get-go here setting up in the MENA region. So we, in a sense, have a second mover advantage to come into sizing digital advertising with a fresh method that really pays respect to the dynamics of the ad market and doesn't try to carry forward a probably decade or 2-decade-old classic survey methodology into a very dynamic digital age, as is the case and the struggle for some other IABs around the world. Andrew, who acts as the programmatic advisor at IAB Europe, and myself have spent the last couple of months finding data, analyzing it, having made interactions and estimations with all of you, and I'm very delighted to share with you today the results of the study. And of course, it's not only the second year that we're doing the study, but also we're doing it in an extremely pivotal year. So the look at 2021 really is the rear-view mirror as we're leaving the tunnel of COVID, as the industry rebounds and jumps back into health. Probably a historically unique year, and this is luckily really the first year that we do have like-for-like comparisons between 2020 and 2021. What are we covering? We're speaking about the MENA region. We are incorporating data and insights from 17 markets in the MENA regions, from GCC to Egypt, over Levant, etc. The interesting thing here is that this data comes from very, very different sources. As Ian said, we have expanded our expert pool of interviewees far beyond the GCC region to capture really the nuances of different patterns in subregions. We're tapping into macroeconomic data, company filings, specific other hard data from all of these different countries to cross-validate and build models that really lift and consolidate the estimates that we provide. We will not split out country by country data for most of them, but we will, for the first time, share more granular, more detailed regional estimates to give you all the texture of how mature the market is and how fast it is developing in certain subregions. What do we do exactly? We are employing a 5-tier approach, and this approach is the best way possible to ensure that any estimates we're doing are robust, they're cross-validated, benchmarks, and enriched. I already mentioned that we're interacting with many of you, so thank you again, to share their estimates, not of their own revenue, but of their total market size, split up by key segments. We then really try to pool and understand what are the similarities between these differences, and what are the between these estimates, and what are the differences. And I use statistical methods to look at variance and deviations and try to get to the bottom of what are the clusters of consensus and where there are differences. And why do these differences occur? Do they occur because there are different perceptions of the market in terms of agency-centric view, long-tail view, specific emphasis on certain formats, etc.? And then we score and weigh estimates on that basis to reflect the specific expertise that every individual participant brings to the study. We enrich the data with various different external sources. And then we develop benchmarks and ratios. This is really, in a sense, the scaffolding of the estimates, if you will, to ensure that they're really, from a logical perspective and from a statistical and macroeconomic perspectives, do hold up. Then we fine-tune and adjust when we build certain scenarios. And then we feed those scenarios back into a workshop with key IAB GCC members to fine-tune and arrive at a consensus. And as I mentioned, this is a similar approach that is being deployed currently in many other countries around the world. But we are the first to be full in on this perspective, on this way of sizing the digital ad market. What is digital advertising? That's the question. What are we really capturing here? Definitions are important. And we've made some changes to how we categorize spend by format versus last year in order to closer align with international estimates and allow an easier benchmarking of the region. So first big bucket is display. And you'll see in the study that we'll present display type numbers in various different ways. Very broadly in display, we've got banners, native ads, special ads, to content, newsletter, and so forth. So it's kind of static display ads. But we also include in our total, I'm just going to split this out, social and video, because this is what the international best practice is. Affiliate, we also have, this is in the other section. Video, we see as a very broad category, in-stream, out-stream, in-feed video, in-text, contextual, and so forth. It is, in our total numbers, a subsegment of display, but we are breaking it out individually as well. Audio, a key format growing from a low base, but very quickly in many regions around the world is also captured in our study. We included here in the other section. Paid for search, classic cornerstone of digital advertising, is its own category. And we also have classified which is in the other section. So when we speak about format definitions, we also need to understand what is the rate in which we're capturing digital advertising. Is it gross? Is it net? Is it net 1, net 2 rate card? There are probably as many definitions of rates as there are countries and formats. What we're doing here is we're aligning to, again, the international standard to look at a gross ad spend view. What do I mean by this? Let's look at rate card on the left, right? Rate card is classic. You look at the campaign, the number of impressions served, and you multiply that by a CPM rate card, which is an old school way of doing things, which doesn't really capture the true market dynamics. It's just an arithmetic exercise going through rate cards. We don't have rate cards anymore often in digital advertising. The market is auction-based, is highly dynamic. This is something that worked in the old world of TV, but there was also often inflating things because it didn't take account of discount structures and so forth. So this is rather a model that is on the way out. And in Europe, we only have 2 markets that capture the market in this way. And we need to do heavy discounting and analysis to come up at a true market picture. On the other hand, you have net data, which is the net media owner revenue after all other fees are being deducted. In the middle, we have gross data, which is what we're reporting on in Europe as well. Gross data is after discounts and agency rebates and so forth, but before commissions or SSP fee to publishers. So it in a sense means it is all the money that arrives at the sell side of the market. This is the view that we're taking in Europe, and this is the view that we are taking here. I think crucially for the region, when we look at international standard, is also, are we looking at ads delivered or ads booked in the region? We're currently looking at ads delivered in the region. And it's quite a unique region, of course, which is such an international hub where we have a strong local hubs which are spending internationally outside of the GCC region. For instance, this is something we're going to consider in the future. Right now, our mission here with the second study is really to steady the ship and to be able to provide like-for-like comparisons with international markets to aid the overall structural development of the market. And this is why both the gross market perspective and the perspective on ads delivered is crucial. Now, methods aside, and let's get to the real stuff. What happened in the market? Digital ad spend in MENA was worth $4.58 billion. This is a 25.9% increase versus 2020, when we did our first study with a reference value of 3.6 billion. This means that the market added in this ad bonanza year of 2021 nearly 1 billion of additional spend. It's a remarkable achievement for the market as it came out of COVID. And it really shows to us that shifts to online streaming, shifts to e-commerce, maturity of the ecosystem, advertisers adjusting their media plans, plus, of course, that kind of organic rebound that we had post-COVID with economic recovery is all coming together and reflected in these numbers. Let's segment this a little bit and understand what are the different formats here. So I put here display and video together just to ensure that it's, to make clear to everybody, this is banners and native, but it's also video. So this is really the biggest bucket in the MENA region, followed by search and then the other segment. And you can see when we look at this 25.9% growth, it was the display and video segment that outperformed this average with 26.8% growth, including social. Search, smaller market, growing still double-digit 24%. This is remarkable. We saw that in other markets as well, where after a slowdown of search in 2020 in many markets, we saw a strong, despite the maturity of the search market or the search model, a strong double-digit increase, which again illustrates the longevity of this model as it evolves. And of course, within the display bit, we have in particular strong dynamics. I'm going to show that to you in a second within video, but also within the social category to reflect dynamics in SMEs, to reflect dynamics in creative development, in capturing not just performance budgets, but also branding budgets, etc. And other here is an aggregate category which we've classified. We got affiliate in here, and of course audio as a sub-segment. We're not breaking it out, but probably it grew much more than the 6%, as it is a still small but extremely dynamic market. Let's drill into this big display bucket which we have in the region and try to unravel it a little bit. So the first perspective we're going to take on display is to split social and non-social. And you can clearly see how fast social grew, 38.3%. This is more than 3x other display formats. We are in a market also where social as a part of display, in a second, is larger than the non-social component. So the total share within display of social increased by a couple of percentage points between 2020 and 2021 to now 62.3% of the overall display market, driven by both established and also new players in this market. The second perspective we're going to take on display is what's happening in video versus banner and native, i.e. kind of non-video formats. And again, we see an outperformance of video, 33.4% versus banner and native growing at 20.9%. In here, and we've changed the categorization here. So don't look at previous year studies to for like, look at how we restate things here. We have included both non-social and social video in the video numbers, and with banner and native, we also have, of course, social native, in-feed banner, and so forth in here as well. So it includes social and non-social components. A new first for this study is breaking out the structure of the MENA region. We are in a large region when it comes to population, but we are also in a region that is very heterogeneous when we look at purchasing power, when we look at the maturity of the digital ad market. So for the first time, we wanted to create a split to understand the relative regional contribution in terms of ads delivered, and also the specific dynamics and maturity of specific sub-regions better. We can reveal that GCC, all the 6 countries in GCC together command 86% of the digital ad spend. Overall, Saudi is the largest market with 40.2% of ads delivered, followed by UAE, and then we got the 4 other GCC countries with around 13.6% growth. Strong dynamics in here, in particular coming from the startup sectors in other GCC regions. We believe Egypt, with a vast population, a strong SME and vast long tail of businesses, and also a highly dynamic digital ad spend, but with lower CPMs, is currently capturing around 8.1% of the market. And then we got other, which is Morocco, Iraq, etc., other Levant countries, contributing 5.9% to the overall growth, overall market size. I already mentioned the term long tail a little bit in my presentation. And another first we're doing in this study is to understand where does money come from. And one of the key things that we did when we tried to reconcile different market estimates is to understand who has a valuable perspective on which part of the market. And we saw differences in estimations depending on how wide we were casting the net. We found that it's very important for us to understand the full size of the market. We're also looking at small and medium-sized businesses, and in particular businesses that are transacting directly, where the long-term SMEs are the largest proportion of that. Which means in digital, and this is very typical actually to how it is in Europe and in other regions, where here actually agencies have a slightly higher share in GCC than some of the other regions around the world. We're going to see a split of around 36.5% of budget go through agencies, and 63.5% goes direct. Agency here means network agency. Let's take some comparisons and see if this is now the overall structure and growth dynamics within the MENA region. What does that mean more broadly? How does the market compare to other markets in the wider EMEA region, which is often seen as a single budget region with large advertisers? So we're trying to, in the next few slides, kind of juxtapose, compare, and benchmark MENA with Europe. And you can see some very, very strong differences, but also some interesting similarities. We're starting with the differences, and we can really see, if we look at digital ad market shares by format, we can really see this strong emphasis of MENA overall, relative to the total market, on social. Whereas previously I showed you the social share of part of display, here's the social share as part of the overall pie across all different formats with over 50%. In Europe, it's around 25%. We have a different balance in Europe between other display and social. In the MENA region, it's really over 2/3 of the entire markets is display, including social. In Europe, it's around it's less. So we have around 50%, and a much stronger search market with 42.9% versus 14.1% in the MENA region, and also a broader bucket of other in Europe, in which we have this historically grown classified and directories, which are very strong in Scandinavia, for instance, which isn't the case in the MENA region. So the allocation of formats is very different. The MENA region is ahead in some ways. Of the last couple of years, we've seen in Europe digital video ad spend outperforming the market average. And we've grown in the last 5 years from around 25% video share of overall display to around 40%. MENA is ahead of that by nearly 10 percentage points, where roughly half of all display spend is now video. This is driven by social, this is driven by younger demographics, and in a sense, a future forward way of running advertising, which many European countries are still catching up to. Overall, if we placed the MENA region with its $4.58 billion of digital ad spend in a European context, how large would it be? Indeed, if we look here, we see a massive distribution with a strong long tail of countries. In Europe, strong skew towards the UK, followed by Germany, France, Russia. The MENA region, in aggregate, would be the 7th largest digital ad market in Europe. Coming back to the point that a lot of macro planning for global brands is running on an EMEA level, we can see that developing the MENA regions with best practices, with standards, measurement, and so forth, bringing this region together as the IAB does, as a kind of single operating space, is actually crucial, because it's an extremely sizable component of the overall EMEA pie. When we look at the 25.9% growth rate, how well does it perform compared to other European countries? I said, yes, it's a rebound, and also some structural factors come into it. It is, if you just look at the distribution here in Europe, it's kind of bang in the middle of how European markets grow. On an average base, so on a mean basis, the European market grew 30.5%. But on a median basis, i.e., where's kind of the middle value in terms of the most frequent value, we can see that the median was at around 25.1%, right where Sweden is. So the MENA region grew faster than the European median. I spoke a little bit about market maturity. And last year, we already showed that the MENA region has a lot of headroom for growth. That ad spend per capita, so how much is being spent per head on digital advertising per year, is still fairly low overall in the MENA region. It is in the lowest third in terms of a European benchmark. But now, for the first time, we can overlay, of course, our regional breakouts. Within those breakouts, look at population data. I'm just giving you some examples here which show that the MENA region itself is highly heterogeneous. That we see, if we look at UAE, for instance, it's in the top third of market maturity from an ad spend per capita perspective. When we look at European markets, of course, the expat situation here contributes to that strongly. But also KSA is kind of in the middle tier of European markets. And then we can just see Egypt with low CPMs, but a vast population, lower purchasing power, is kind of at the tail end of European markets. Overall, I think this shows that we are grappling with very different dynamics within the MENA region itself, and that with pockets of maturity and pockets of emerging market characteristics lumped together in one region, which is why the structural development of the region is so crucial. But we can see that whether it's Egypt, whether it's UAE, the numbers are close to some European reference markets. Some conclusions and key learnings from this study. So we have, in the second year now, refined our ad spend model for better, more accurate segmentation. We can see the rebound that we saw was fueled by a range of factors. It was the mechanic rebound as the economy rose again after COVID, but also consumer shift and the maturation of digital channels are all reflective in here. GCC takes the lion's share of spend in the region. We can clearly see that there's a massive long tail of direct businesses and SMEs that are crucial for the size of the market in this region. Social and video are much stronger in this region than in other parts of the world, which puts also the MENA region in good perspective to try new things, to be global firsts, etc., as the market is in a sense so mature when it comes to those kinds of formats. And as I mentioned, lastly, a vastly heterogeneous picture in terms of population size and ad market maturity. Those were some of the key findings of our study. It will be available to download for all of you tomorrow. I remain available for questions, of course, now in our Q&A, but also afterwards, if you have any methodology or clarification questions, I am at your service. With that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm going to pass over to the Q&A.
Thanks very much, Daniel. I think we will have a few minutes for Q&A. If anyone does have any burning questions or comments they would like to make, this is a good opportunity to do that before we go on to the next topic. There's a question in the chat, Daniel. I don't know if you want to...
Let me see the chat. Thank you for your question. Digital is a dynamic media. The current methodology is still conducted offline, based on different sources. You consider to measure the ad spend passively by collecting directly from the main ad source by all social and non-social platforms. That's a good question. Indeed, the market is highly dynamic. You can take a macro or a microeconomic view on the market. I have, for various other exercises, be it for measuring microeconomics of programmatic auctions and so forth, tap directly into SSP systems. We've done in other regions, data scraping or API queries from large platforms. However, those are very good to understand what's going on the micro level. However, the numbers there do not reflect the total market size. So we found that an offline methodology is actually essential. We need this more abstracted picture of total. We need to have this more abstracted picture of total spend. API-driven or kind of looking in the system style approach cannot replace survey-based and macroeconomic modeling. It can refine things, but we hardly ever are going to be in a position where we can capture spend from everybody directly, because it would require lots of different integrations. It would be, from a regulatory and other perspectives, impossible. So we can only do spot checks to look at things in a small detail. Markets like France, for instance, do that. They are superimposing some programmatic data from SSPs over their programmatic estimates, but they're clearly saying also in the footnotes, this is only an additional layer. For instance, open auctions versus private auction and so forth on the market. It doesn't capture everything. So one has to be, I think, very careful on how one uses this type of API-based streaming and microeconomic data. The fact that one uses an offline methodology in an online world is not necessarily a bad thing. It really depends on the outcomes that we want to deliver in a study. A different question, do we have any reading on social channel split that we can share? Unfortunately, we can't share that in this study. What I can share is that all players grew and that we have a healthy mix of players in the basket. Another question, is 32% mentioned for UAE delivered in the country or planned from it? It is a delivery perspective. Regarding the ad spend, will this include the budget spending from GCC targeting outside GCC, like tourism boards, for example? It's a good question. Again, we are not looking at things that are going outside the MENA region, i.e. the tourism board spending in Europe or spending in the US. We have discussed that and we're thinking it would be very interesting given the uniqueness of the region in terms of the role of these types of budgets, to look at that separately and to, in the future, maybe compare an ads delivered versus booked perspective, and then also have a global booked perspective. So in a sense, look at the GCC region and the wider MENA region as a hub for spending, for planning and buying globally. In a sense, think of it, like the digital media equivalent of Dubai Airport as the critical global infrastructure hub. Any other questions?
Sorry, Daniel, I'll just jump in on this question. Apologies, I had to drop out. My connection is very iffy in Abu Dhabi. I think just the one thing on the export budgets. I think that's a very valid point, Omar, and I think it's something that we have to look at. Hopefully, with more players coming on board, and I think what Ian said at the beginning of the call is super crucial, which is making sure that we get as many participants as possible, whether they're members of the IAB or not. Ideally, everyone is a member, but participating in the study, because this study is all about bringing transparency to the market. And actually, when we speak to agencies, publishers, anyone we want to import into the region, that's the first question they kind of ask. So transparency around export is super important, but maybe as well transparency around import, because we have a lot of, we see a lot of Chinese brands, especially on the fashion side, coming in and advertising for MENA users, and probably the platforms can contribute a lot to that.
I think it's a very interesting point that many markets have to grapple with as budgets are becoming much more international. We see also, for instance, when we look in Europe and the US at the rise of players like Amazon and the retail media landscape, that we see, for instance, with some of the large e-commerce players, 60% plus coming from Chinese sellers, and therefore also kind of Chinese local or other ad budgets. So I think we live in a globalized world, and that poses some challenges for future estimations of ad spend, where we need to unravel more clearly in a sense, the advertising supply chains and the different budget pools that are impacting a region or that are coming from a region, particularly now in a probably 3-4 year recessionary environment. This is in particular crucial. Question about direct versus agency split of spend. What is the trend we see? Unfortunately, we captured this only for the first time, so we do not have a historical perspective yet, I'm afraid. But we are trying to, of course, track this over time and see how that would change. I think we are, if I'm abstracting, globally seeing counteracting trends. Right, we have a growing long tail of businesses which are coming into digital advertising for the first time, self-serve, mom and pop shops, digital endemic companies that were kind of riding on cheap VC money, which might now be over. I'm going to talk about that in a second in my Outlook piece. Then we had the in-housing trend, but we're also seeing that a lot of advertisers, particularly in a volatile environment, don't like fixed costs. So we're seeing in some parts a stronger reliance coming back to agencies, also charged, of course, by the fact now that we are in this period of perpetual uncertainty when it comes to targeting. Is it going to be ID solutions? Is it going to be first-party data? Is it going to be cookieless? Making a wrong decision here can be fatal for one's business, and I think this kind of strengthens the advisory capacity of agencies. So it's kind of a push and pull in both directions at the same time, and we really have to see, unfortunately, wait how that translates into numbers next year. Ziad, non-social and social video, we're keeping it together in this study as we want to provide a holistic view on video. We might consider further video segmentations in next iterations of the study. Budgets from gaming sites accounted where is the question. Overall, when we're doing it not on a by site, but on a by channel basis. So if you look at budgets, I presume you mean them as publishers. So it would really depend on what formats they have available, whether that would be banner formats, whether it would be video formats, etc. Right? It could be, if you look at Twitch streaming, that would be in video. If you look at in-game advertising, that is in display and native, and partly probably some small proportion of that would also be in other. We are not covering influencer marketing in this study right now. We're just looking at paid media slots. Influencer marketing we keep it entirely separate. There might be an additional study on this, and we're also not covering that in Europe, as we believe it's an entirely different economy, a super exciting one that we'd love to get a better read on. But measuring influencer spend comes with its own methodological challenges, where you need to go to the influencer agencies, you need to have the platform estimates, and also probably crawl and analyze different influencer pages. Coming back to the earlier questions on, can you get some data from the systems? I think here, when we look at influencer stuff, this will be an exciting area to explore. We do not have data spends by industry. So again, we're looking at it from a perspective of what arrives at the sell side. Typically, approaches that have ad spend per industry look at it from a rate card perspective. Some countries used to have that in the past. Typically, not anymore, as when stuff arrives on the sell side, how you classify a certain industry and how kind of rate card shares translate into gross. It's highly complex to do, and there's a high risk of misrepresentation. Typically, IAB ad spend studies do not have that. What we are factoring in the future is probably maybe a qualitative reading on how key sectors, be it, for instance, direct-to-consumer brands, be it e-commerce brands, be it travel industry and so forth, how they are performing. But it requires a lot of reflection, standardization in terms of who classifies which brands as what, among all of our survey participants to get really a robust reading on this. So this is a work in progress, but it's a great question that we definitely want to look into. We haven't split mobile versus web, no. I think in particular, given the kind of prevalence of social, a lot of which is mobile. I think it would skew the picture. We have not done that anymore in Europe because it would just render classically kind of in a sense, a mobile first environment. I think later on it will become more interesting to see, well, on what type of screens are things being delivered, particularly in the video environment when CTV ads are really taking off. Another question, year-on-year growth per country in the future? Absolutely, yes. So now that we have the regional split, We'll have the same regional split next year. So this means we will also have growth dynamics on a bi-regional basis. And personally, that's kind of maybe one of the areas I look most forward to. Yeah, mobile is included in the formats, exactly. Mobile, desktop, regardless of the device, spend is included in the formats.
Yeah, I think I just want to add to some of this. I mean, looking through some of these questions, thanks, Daniel, for going through some of those answers. I think a lot of what you're asking is perfectly reasonable and great builds on the work that we've done over the last 2 years, but they do require more data, which means we require more inputs from the industry, whether that be specific media channels, specific small agencies, direct advertisers, people outside of Dubai and in other regions, other sub-regions across the region, other markets across the region as well. So take this opportunity to say the depth of answering your questions really is in your hands. The more you're able to support these kinds of initiatives, the more detail we can add into them, and the more we can help you answer these questions. Because I think that's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to help everyone grow the industry together. So that was kind of how I would answer some of those questions. It's up to you how detailed we can be, because we get the information from you. So thanks, Daniel. As I said in the chat, if there are further questions that we don't have time for today, by all means, drop an email to info@iabgcc.com, and we'll either answer those or read them across to Daniel to answer them. And happy to have follow-up conversations on any of this information. And thanks for taking us through the study that we've conducted on the market sizing, or the ad spend survey that we've all been listening to. As it seems everyone was very engaged and interested in the information, so hopefully we've added some value to everyone there as well. For those that are keen, as I said, by all means, please send us further questions. Happy to answer those in so much as we can. The presentation and the recording of the presentation, the ad spend survey I'm referring to, will be available on the IAB GCC website from tomorrow. And you're more than welcome to download that and share with your teams. As I said, we've decided to provide this to the industry, both members and non-members, free of charge in this instance. So make use of that as you see fit. And one final plea: for those that are not members of the IAB and not engaged in some of the other initiatives that we have, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get you engaged. We're actually conducting a number of other interesting work streams, everything ranging from diversity, equality and inclusion, through to measurement, through to other research projects such as these, as well as having a look at some of the growing channels such as digital out of home, CTV, audio, etc. Lots of exciting things that you can get involved in as a member. So by all means, reach out to us if you can. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. Hopefully you found that useful. Always keen to get feedback, so please feel free to give us feedback over the course of the next couple of days and weeks. Thank you very much, Daniel, for your time as well.
Thank you all.
Cheers, everybody.